On my 34th birthday, my sister's daughter tossed her drink on my outfit and said, "Now you look as cheap as you really are." My mother took her side, telling me not to make a scene. I just smiled. That night, I canceled my sister's credit cards. But at 6:50 the next morning, her daughter woke up to find her car completely gone. And then they realized exactly who held the keys to their perfect lives. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your worth. My name is Meredith, and I am 34 years old. I am still healing from a lifetime of wounds my family inflicted, but I am no longer playing the victim. As the founder and chief executive officer of Aura Lifestyle Management, a highly exclusive corporate concierge service, I built a multi-million-dollar firm from the ground up. Yet to my family, I was always just the disappointment. The conflict began on a brisk October evening in downtown Chicago. I had arranged my own birthday dinner at an impossibly exclusive restaurant in the Gold Coast neighborhood. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over white linen tablecloths. The soft hum of classical music mingled with the quiet clinking of silver against fine china. It was the kind of place where reservations were booked months in advance. I was paying for the entire evening out of my own pocket, just as I always did. Sitting across from me were the people who were supposed to celebrate my life. My older sister Stephanie, who was 38, her husband Brad, who was 42, and my mother Linda, who was 62. The first course had barely arrived when the complaints began. Stephanie held her wine glass up to the light, swirling the expensive Cabernet I had carefully selected. She sighed heavily, dropping her hand back to the table with a theatrical thud. "I really thought a place like this would have a better vintage," she announced, her voice cutting through the elegant atmosphere. "This tastes entirely too young. It lacks complexity." She flagged down our waiter, snapping her fingers in a way that made my stomach twist with embarrassment. She demanded he bring the sommelier immediately. I watched the waiter's face flush as he nodded and hurried away. Stephanie smoothed her perfectly styled blonde hair and looked at me with a condescending smirk. "You really should have let me choose the wine, Meredith. You simply do not have the palate for these things." Before I could even formulate a polite response, Brad chimed in. He leaned back in his leather chair, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. He worked as an executive at a mid-sized logistics corporation, and he never missed an opportunity to ensure everyone in the room knew his title. "Actually, Stephanie is right," Brad said loudly. "When you operate at my level in the corporate world, you learn to distinguish quality. Just last week, I was treating my vice presidents to dinner at an exclusive steakhouse. The bill was astronomical, of course, but when you are managing the kind of high-level accounts I handle, money is just a tool to maintain status." He took a large bite of his appetizer, chewing loudly. "You have to project success, Meredith. It is all about the image." My mother Linda nodded in vigorous agreement with her son-in-law. She sat at the head of the table, radiating an aura of old money entitlement that was entirely fabricated. Her gaze shifted from Brad to me, traveling slowly up and down my outfit. I had chosen a bespoke midnight blue silk dress for the evening. It was an elegant, understated piece that cost $4,000, tailored perfectly to my frame. It made me feel strong and confident. But under my mother's critical eye, I felt like a teenager being reprimanded for a dress code violation. "Meredith, what exactly are you wearing?" Linda asked, her tone dripping with passive-aggressive concern. "I told you this was a fine dining establishment. That dress is just so drab. It looks like something you picked off a clearance rack for a funeral. Why do you always insist on blending into the background?" She gestured grandly toward Stephanie, who was wearing a loud, heavily sequined designer gown that sparkled aggressively under the chandeliers. "Look at your sister," Linda continued. "Stephanie understands how to present herself as a traditional, successful wife. She dresses like a woman who knows her worth. You look like a secretary who got lost on her way home from the office." I kept my expression perfectly neutral, taking a slow sip of my water. I was used to this. Growing up in our affluent North Shore suburb, my mother had always made her preferences painfully clear. Stephanie was the traditional beauty, the one who married a corporate executive, the one who fit the perfect suburban mold. I was the strange independent daughter who cared more about building a business than finding a wealthy husband. It is a bespoke piece, Mom, I said quietly, keeping my voice steady. I like the color. Linda scoffed, waving her manicured hand in the air. Well, you clearly do not know how to dress for your age. And frankly, Meredith, it reflects poorly on the family. You are 34 years old and still unmarried. You spend all your time running around doing chores for other people with that cute little errand running gig of yours. When are you going to get a real career, or better yet, a husband to provide for you, so you can stop working entirely? The cute little errand running gig she was referring to was Aura Lifestyle Management. My firm handled exclusive logistics for high net worth individuals and corporate executives. We secured private jets, negotiated luxury real estate rentals, and managed elite events. My company brought in 8 figures annually. But to my mother, it was just a pathetic little hobby, because I provided a service rather than sitting in a corner office with a traditional corporate title like Brad. The dinner service continued at an agonizingly slow pace. Each course brought a new wave of complaints from Stephanie and more condescending advice from my mother. When the main entrees arrived, the roasted duck I had ordered was completely ignored by my family as they devoured their exorbitant steaks and seafood. Brad chewed with his mouth slightly open, a habit that had always disgusted me, but one that my mother conveniently ignored because he was her perfect son-in-law. He ordered an imported Wagyu steak, a side of truffle lobster mac and cheese, and a reserve bottle of scotch for himself. He ordered with the casual arrogance of a man who fully believed a massive family trust fund was footing the bill. I really do not understand your business model, Meredith, Brad said, suddenly pointing his steak knife at me across the table. You run around booking restaurant reservations and buying concert tickets for people. How does that even generate real revenue? In my sector, we move millions in tangible assets. We drive the economy. You are basically a glorified personal assistant. Why do you not ask me for a job at my firm? We always need administrative help. Stephanie giggled, pressing her hand against Brad's arm. Oh, honey, do not tease her. She is doing the best she can. Not everyone has your business acumen. My mother wiped her mouth with her linen napkin and sighed dramatically. Brad is just trying to be helpful, Stephanie. Meredith should listen to him. It is exhausting having to explain to my friends at the club what my daughter actually does for a living. I tell them you are in event planning because it sounds far more respectable than whatever it is you actually do. You should be grateful Brad is offering you a lifeline. I placed my fork down on the pristine white plate, taking a slow, deep breath. The scent of roasted garlic and rich wine filled the air, contrasting sharply with the toxic atmosphere at our table. I looked at the three of them sitting there in their expensive clothes, completely oblivious to reality. Thank you for the offer, Brad, I said, my voice perfectly smooth and unbothered. But my firm is doing quite well. I am perfectly happy where I am. My mother rolled her eyes, looking toward the ceiling, as if asking for divine patience. You are impossible, Meredith. Always so stubborn. Always refusing to accept help from your betters. This is exactly why you are sitting here with us tonight, instead of celebrating with a husband. You push everyone away with your defensive attitude. I did not push back. I let her words hang in the air, absorbing the full weight of their arrogance. Let them boast, I thought to myself. Let them insult my clothes and mock my career. Let them order the most expensive items on the menu and treat the staff like peasants. They were enjoying the peak of their delusion, and I was quietly observing the final moments of their reign. The tension at the table was a familiar heavy blanket, but tonight I refused to let it suffocate me. The silence that followed my mother's final critique was broken only by the sound of Caitlin tapping furiously on her phone screen. My 18-year-old niece had been sitting across from me, completely ignoring the family dynamic in favor of her social media feeds. She wore a designer silk top that cost more than a college textbook, and her blonde hair was styled in perfectly effortless waves that probably took 2 hours to achieve. Caitlin sighed loudly, a dramatic sound that immediately drew the attention of her parents and grandmother. Is everything all right, sweetheart? Linda asked, her harsh tone instantly melting into pure grandmotherly affection. You look so exhausted. Caitlin set her phone face down on the table and rubbed her temples, I am just so stressed out, Grandma. These college applications are literally destroying my life. My college counselor says I need to rewrite my personal statement for Cornell and Yale again. It is just too much pressure. I mean, I am already president of the charity league and captain of the tennis team. What more do they want from me? Stephanie reached over and patted her daughter's hand sympathetically. I know, baby. The Ivy League process is so demanding these days. But you are brilliant, and you have the Blackwell name backing you up. They would be lucky to have you. Brad nodded, taking another sip of his scotch. Exactly. And if they give you any trouble, I can always make a few calls to some alumni I know from the country club. Do not let it ruin your senior year, Caitlin. You need to focus on your mental health. Caitlin leaned forward, her eyes suddenly bright and fixed directly on me. That is actually exactly what I was thinking about, Dad. My mental health. She offered me a sweet, calculated smile that looked exactly like her mother's. Aunt Meredith, since it is your birthday, I was thinking about how we should celebrate family. And since I am so stressed with all this Ivy League stuff, I figured out the perfect way for you to help me decompress. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I had a feeling I knew exactly where this was going. And how would I do that, Caitlin? Well, she began, her voice taking on a wheedling, sugary quality. You have all those connections through your little concierge business, right? You know people in the entertainment industry. I want to go to Coachella this spring to celebrate getting through applications. But not just regular general admission. I want the ultimate VIP artist guest package, the one with access to the private viewing areas and the luxury safari tents. My friends are all going, and it would be the perfect treat. You can arrange that for me, right? Like as a gift. I looked at my niece. The VIP safari packages for that festival cost upwards of $10,000 before even factoring in the first-class flights she would inevitably expect. She was asking me to drop a massive amount of money on a weekend party simply because she felt stressed about writing a college essay. Caitlin, I said, my voice measured and calm. I understand that the college application process is demanding, but I am not going to buy you a VIP music festival package. Caitlin's sweet smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of profound offense. Why not? You run an errand service for rich people. You can probably get it for free if you just ask one of your clients. I do not ask my corporate clients for free favors to fund teenage vacations, I replied. And even if I did, the answer would still be no. It is an extravagant request. If you want to attend a music festival, you can save up your allowance and buy a standard ticket like any other high school student. The temperature at the table dropped, freezing the air around us. Stephanie slammed her wine glass down on the table, spilling a few dark red drops onto the pristine white tablecloth. Are you kidding me, Meredith? Stephanie demanded, her voice rising loudly enough that a waiter walking past actually paused. Your niece comes to you expressing how overwhelmed she is and asks for one simple favor, and you shoot her down. It is a music festival ticket. It is not like she asked you to buy her a house. A $10,000 luxury package is not a simple favor, Stephanie, I pointed out, keeping my voice completely level. I am not funding a luxury vacation for an 18-year-old. Oh, please, Brad scoffed, cutting into his steak with aggressive force. You are acting like she asked for the moon. You are single. You have no kids to support, no real financial obligations to worry about. What exactly are you doing with the money you make from your little business anyway? Hoarding it in a mattress somewhere. Linda shook her head, looking at me with pure disgust. You have always been terribly selfish, Meredith. Your sister and brother-in-law have real responsibilities. They have a mortgage in the North Shore. They have country club dues. They have to maintain a certain lifestyle for their children. The least you could do as the unmarried aunt with zero responsibilities is treat your niece to a nice weekend away. I looked at my mother, truly astounded by the layers of delusion she operated under. A nice weekend away, I repeated. Mom, she is asking for a 5-star desert resort experience. And she deserves it. Stephanie snapped, her face flushing with anger. She works twice as hard as you ever did at her age. She is carrying the weight of the family expectations on her shoulders. You sit in your apartment organizing dry cleaning and booking restaurant tables for middle management nobodies. You have no idea what real pressure looks like. I took a slow, steady breath and let the insult pass. Explaining my company to people who were committed to misunderstanding me had become pointless. They needed me to be small because admitting the truth would make their own lives look painfully hollow. It does not matter what my business entails, I said, folding my napkin and placing it carefully beside my plate. The answer is no. I am not paying for the trip. Caitlin let out a loud, dramatic groan and slumped back in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest. This is so unfair, she whined, glaring at me. You are literally the worst aunt ever. I do not even know why we bothered coming to your stupid birthday dinner. You never do anything for anyone but yourself. Linda reached out and rubbed Caitlin's arm soothingly. Do not let her upset you, darling. Your aunt just has a very small, isolated life. She does not understand the importance of family generosity. My mother then turned her sharp gaze back to me. You know, Meredith, I honestly do not know how you sleep at night. You sit on whatever meager savings you manage to scrape together from your little errand-running gig, and you refuse to share even a fraction of it with your own blood. You hoard your money like a miser. It is incredibly unattractive. No wonder you cannot keep a man interested. The cruelty of her words was designed to wound me deeply. It was the same tactic she had used since I was a child, finding the most vulnerable spot and pressing on it until I surrendered. But tonight, I felt absolutely nothing. No shame, no guilt, no desire to explain myself. Instead, I thought about the financial ledgers sitting on my desk back at my penthouse. I thought about the massive monthly transfers I authorized from my personal accounts to keep the illusion of their wealth alive. I thought about how every single thing they were wearing and eating right now was essentially paid for by the very woman they were calling a selfish hoarder. I am comfortable with my financial decisions, Mom, I said quietly. Stephanie let out a harsh, bitter laugh. Well, you are the only one who is. You are 34 years old, Meredith. You are wearing a drab dress to a five-star restaurant and refusing to buy your niece a graduation present. You are embarrassing yourself, and you are embarrassing us. Brad is right. You are just a glorified personal assistant pretending to be a business owner. Brad chuckled, pointing his fork toward Stephanie in agreement. Let her keep her little savings, Steph. When her errand business goes under next year because she lacks basic networking skills, she will come crying to us for a handout. And we will see how generous she feels then. The waiter returned at that exact moment, nervously placing my main course in front of me. I looked down at the perfectly seared scallops. I suddenly had no appetite. I looked up at the four faces staring back at me across the table. They were united in their disdain, their entitlement, and their absolute certainty that they were superior to me in every conceivable way. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip, savoring the cool liquid against my throat. I looked at Caitlin, who was still pouting intensely, her arms crossed defensively. I looked at Brad, who was signaling the waiter for another expensive scotch to add to the tab he fully expected me to cover. I looked at Stephanie, who was whispering something to my mother and rolling her eyes in my direction. They had no idea that they were sitting on a financial trapdoor and that I was the only person holding the lever. They believed their own lies so deeply that they had forgotten how to survive in the real world without my silent intervention. Their arrogance was a fragile glass house built entirely on my secret foundation. You are right, Stephanie, I said, my voice soft and calm. I am the only one who is comfortable with my decisions tonight, but I think that is perfectly fine. I simply smiled, leaning back in my chair as they continued to mutter their complaints. The waiter arrived with a second expensive scotch, placing it carefully on the table before scurrying away. My refusal to engage with their taunts seemed to infuriate Caitlin more than denial of the Coachella tickets. She sat across from me, vibrating with deep, spoiled teenage rage. Her manicured fingers tapped in erratic rhythm against the base of her wineglass. She had ordered an expensive Bordeaux, despite being underage, a luxury the restaurant overlooked, because Brad heavily tipped the host. Caitlin was not used to hearing the word no. For 18 years, her parents had smoothed over every obstacle and fulfilled every extravagant whim, while my mother applauded them for being generous providers. Watching me and aunt she viewed as entirely beneath her deny her something she desperately wanted was causing a visible short circuit in her mind. I took a slow bite of my food, focusing on the texture, completely ignoring the toxic energy radiating from my niece. The jazz music playing through the restaurant speakers seemed to swell, filling the awkward silence at our table. Stephanie continued to whisper to my mother, casting dark looks in my direction, while Brad checked his watch, making a show of how bored he was. The disconnect between my internal peace and their outward hostility was palpable. I felt grounded. I knew exactly who I was and what I had built. They only knew the false reality I had allowed them to believe. Suddenly, Caitlin pushed her chair back. The heavy wood scraped loudly against the marble floor, causing several diners at adjacent tables to turn their heads. Her face was flushed with hot, angry color. The sweet, manipulative facade she had worn earlier was gone, replaced by the raw, vicious entitlement she had inherited from her mother. She stood up abruptly, her hands shaking as she reached for her full glass of red wine. It happened fast, but my mind processed the movement slowly. Caitlin did not just bump the glass or let it slip from her fingers. She grabbed the crystal stem, lifted it, and with a sharp swing of her arm hurled the entire contents directly across the table at me. The red liquid splashed heavily against my chest, soaking instantly into the delicate silk of my bespoke midnight blue dress. The wine felt shockingly cold against my skin. It ran down the bodice, pooling in the fabric at my lap and dripping onto the expensive chair. Drops of Cabernet splattered across my collarbone and caught the edge of my cheek. The sound of the liquid hitting me was followed by a collective gasp from the tables nearby. The gentle hum of conversation died instantly, replaced by a stunned, heavy silence. Even the waiters stopped in their tracks. I sat perfectly still. I did not gasp. I did not jump up from my chair. I simply looked down at the dark, wet stain ruining $4,000 worth of custom tailoring. The silk clung to my skin, ruined beyond repair. Then I raised my eyes to look at my niece. Caitlin was breathing heavily, a triumphant, malicious smirk spreading across her face. She slammed the empty crystal glass back onto the table with a loud clink. "Now you look as cheap as you really are," she sneered. Her voice carried clearly across the quiet dining room. "You deserve to look like trash, Aunt Meredith. That is what you are. Just cheap trash who cannot even buy her niece a simple birthday present. Happy birthday to you." Stephanie did not reprimand her daughter. She did not apologize. Instead, she reached up and gently touched her daughter on the arm as if calming a startled horse. "Okay, sit down," Stephanie murmured, shooting me a look of justification. "You made your point. There is no need to get so worked up over this." Brad let out a low chuckle, taking a slow sip of his newly delivered scotch. He leaned back, clearly enjoying the show, finding immense entertainment in my public humiliation. He did not offer a napkin or a word of reproach to his daughter. In his eyes, I was finally being put in my rightful place. I turned my gaze to my mother. Surely a mother would intervene when her adult daughter was assaulted in a public place on her birthday. Linda sighed heavily, an exaggerated sound of profound inconvenience. She reached across the table, picked up a single white linen napkin, and tossed it carelessly onto the table in front of me. "Meredith, please do not make a scene over a cheap dress," Linda said, her voice dripping with extreme annoyance. "You are upsetting your niece on a school night. You know she is incredibly stressed about her Ivy League applications right now, and you deliberately provoked her by being so stingy and difficult. Just wipe yourself off and let it go. You can buy another plain dress at the mall tomorrow. Stop trying to make everything about you." A waiter rushed over, holding a clean white towel, his eyes wide with horror and sympathy. "Mom, I am so sorry." He began reaching out to help me blot the wine. I raised a single hand, stopping him in his tracks. "It is quite all right," I told the waiter, my voice carrying a quiet, absolute authority. "I am fine, but I would like the check, please." The waiter nodded frantically, pulling the black leather billfold from his apron and placing it gently on the dry edge of the table near my right hand. He quickly backed away, leaving us alone in the center of the staring restaurant. I looked around the table one last time. Stephanie was murmuring validations to Caitlin, who was glaring at me with unrepentant hostility. Brad was swirling his scotch, looking quite pleased with himself. Linda was adjusting her diamond necklace, looking anywhere but at the wine soaking through my clothes. They expected me to cry. They expected me to scream. They expected me to run out of the restaurant in tears, allowing them to claim the ultimate victory over the family disappointment. They wanted a reaction that would prove I was the unstable emotional mess they had always painted me to be. Instead, I smiled. It was not a forced smile or a tight grimace of pain. It was a genuine, serene smile that reached all the way to my eyes. A wave of profound, absolute clarity washed over me. I felt an incredible sense of liberation. This was the final moment. This was the last time I would ever allow these people to disrespect me. The charade was officially over. I opened my purse and withdrew my sleek metal corporate card. I opened the folder and glanced at the total. $1,200. I placed the card inside and set it at the edge of the table. I did not dab at the wine. I did not attempt to dry myself. I simply picked up my purse and stood up from the table. The dark stain dripped slowly onto the floor, but I kept my posture impeccably straight. My mother opened her mouth to say something, but the absolute chilling silence of my demeanor stopped the words in her throat. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not offer a single word of parting. I just turned my back on them and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them sitting in the quiet judgment of every other patron in the room. The crisp October air hit my face the moment the valet opened the heavy glass doors of the restaurant. I stepped out onto the Chicago pavement, shivering slightly as the evening wind caught the wine-soaked silk of my dress clinging damply to my chest. The valet rushed forward, holding the door to my waiting town car. I slid into the leather back seat, giving the driver a brief nod. He caught sight of my ruined dress in the rearview mirror, but said nothing, smoothly pulling away from the curb and merging into the downtown traffic. As I watched the city lights blur past the tinted windows, my heart beat with a steady, rhythmic calm. There were no tears. There was no lingering sting of rejection. For 10 years I had carried the crushing weight of my family's fabricated reality on my shoulders. I had absorbed their insults, their condescension, and their extravagant demands, all to maintain an illusion that protected their fragile egos. Tonight, that illusion shattered the moment Caitlin threw that glass of wine. My driver pulled up to the private entrance of my luxury high-rise in the River North district. The doorman greeted me with a polite smile, expertly masking his shock at the dark crimson stain spreading across my bodice. I stepped into the private elevator and pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner, letting the quiet hum of the ascent soothe my thoughts. When the doors opened directly into my penthouse, the sweeping panoramic views of the Chicago skyline greeted me. The space was a testament to everything I had built with Aura Lifestyle Management. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glittering city, while sleek minimalist furniture and curated modern art filled the expansive open-concept living area. It was a world away from the suffocating suburban conformity my mother and sister worshipped. I walked straight to my master suite, stripping off the ruined $4,000 dress and tossing it carelessly into the trash bin. It was a casualty of war, and I did not mourn it. I stepped into a hot shower, letting the water wash away the sticky residue of the wine and the lingering toxicity of my family's presence. When I emerged, I wrapped myself in a thick cashmere robe and walked down the long hallway to my home office. I sat down at my glass desk and picked up my phone, dialing a number I knew by heart. It was nearly 10 o'clock at night, but Vince, my dedicated wealth manager, answered on the second ring. He had been with me since the early days of Aura and managed every aspect of my personal and corporate finances. "Vince," I said, my voice crisp and authoritative, "I need you to come up to the penthouse. Bring the master ledgers for the Preston family trust accounts." There was a brief pause on the line before he replied, "I am on my way, Meredith." Vince lived 3 floors down in the same luxury building, a perk I had arranged to ensure he was always accessible for my international clients. While I waited for him, I booted up my secure desktop terminal and opened the private banking portal. My eyes tracked over the accounts, the massive corporate dividends, the high-yield investment portfolios, and the specific diverted funds that had kept my family afloat for a decade. The truth was something my mother and sister remained blissfully ignorant of. 10 years ago, when I was just 24 years old, my father passed away from a sudden massive heart attack. To the outside world, he was a highly successful real estate developer who provided a life of absolute luxury for his wife and daughters. But when the lawyers opened his books, the reality was a catastrophic nightmare. My father had been drowning in massive, insurmountable debt for years. He had leveraged everything, borrowing heavily against properties he did not fully own, and hiding the impending ruin behind expensive country club memberships and luxury cars. When he died, the legendary family trust that my mother and Stephanie constantly bragged about went completely bankrupt. It was liquidated entirely to pay off furious creditors and avoid federal tax evasion charges. They were left with absolutely nothing. No mansion, no endless credit limits, and no financial safety net. They were facing total financial ruin and the absolute destruction of their precious social standing. I was just starting my concierge firm back then, working 20 hours a day to build my elite client base. I could have let them fall. I could have let them experience the real world and learn how to survive on their own. But I was young, and I still craved my mother's elusive approval. I desperately wanted to keep the peace and spare them the humiliation of losing their status. So I made a quiet, confidential arrangement with the estate lawyers. I willingly took on the massive financial burden of their lifestyle. As Aura Lifestyle Management grew from a small startup into a highly exclusive firm generating tens of millions in revenue, I quietly funneled my own corporate dividends into a dummy account. This account was carefully disguised as the continued monthly payouts from the Preston Family Trust. For 10 long years, I paid for absolutely everything. I paid the exorbitant mortgage on Stephanie and Brad's massive house in the North Shore. I paid the ridiculous monthly maintenance fees for my mother's prestigious country club membership. I funded Caitlin's expensive private school tuition, her designer wardrobe, and the brand new Range Rover she drove so proudly. I heavily subsidized Brad's lifestyle, allowing him to believe his mid-level executive salary was somehow stretching to cover a life of pure luxury. I did it all silently, while they continued to treat me like a pathetic, struggling personal assistant who could barely afford rent in the city. They truly believed the trust fund was sustaining them, and that I was simply excluded from it because of my unconventional career choices. They mocked the very hands that fed them every single day. The soft chime of my private elevator doors opening pulled me from my dark thoughts. Vince walked into my office carrying a thick leather briefcase. He was a sharp, highly analytical man in his late 40s, who had always despised the arrangement I made for my family. He took a seat across from my desk and opened his briefcase, pulling out a stack of neatly bound financial reports. "You asked for the family ledgers," he said, pushing the heavy documents toward me. "Is everything all right, Meredith? You rarely ask to see these specific accounts outside of our quarterly reviews." I placed my hands flat on the cool glass of my desk, looking at the man who knew all my secrets. "I just had my birthday dinner with my mother, Stephanie, Brad, and Caitlin," I told him, keeping my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. Caitlin threw a glass of wine on my dress because I refused to buy her a $10,000 Coachella VIP package. My mother told me not to make a scene over a cheap dress, and Stephanie called me a glorified errand girl who hoards her meager savings. Vince's jaw tightened visibly. He knew exactly how much that dress cost, and he knew exactly how much money I moved into their accounts on the first of every month. He shook his head. "Let us shut it down," I agreed. I turned toward the massive dual monitors on my desk. The screens woke instantly, bathing the office in blue light. Vince pulled out a secure laptop, syncing it to my network. For 10 years, we maintained this intricate web of financial deception, mimicking the disbursement schedules of a wealth trust. Vince managed it flawlessly. "Are you entirely certain about this, Meredith?" Vince asked, his hands hovering over his keyboard. "Once we begin dismantling this structure, the fallout will be immediate. They are going to notice by tomorrow morning. I want them to notice," I said, my voice steady. "I want them to feel the absolute reality of their situation. I am done playing the silent benefactor to people who treat me like dirt." Vince nodded, a faint smile touching the corners of his mouth. He typed rapidly, bringing up the master dashboard for the dummy trust. I logged into my own portal, mirroring his screen. The numbers glowing back at me represented a decade of my hard work siphoned off to fund their arrogance. Let us begin with Stephanie, I instructed. I clicked on the profile for my older sister. A menu appeared listing 4 separate American Express Platinum cards. The pending charges were staggering. I scrolled through the line items. There were charges for high-end spas, luxury boutiques, and a private tennis instructor. Look at this, I said. Brad charged a $3,000 dinner at a steakhouse last week. He boasted about it tonight. Paid for entirely by the sister he continuously insults. Vince noted, his tone dry. Should I initiate the card cancellations? No, I will do it, I replied. I moved my mouse over the active status indicator for Stephanie's primary card. I thought about the sheer panic she would feel when that card declined the next morning. It was not a feeling of guilt, but a deep sense of justice. I clicked confirm. I repeated the process for Brad's card, watching the status flip to terminated. Then I moved to Caitlin's supplementary cards. The teenager who hurled a glass of red wine at me had managed to rack up $600 in cosmetic purchases this afternoon. I canceled her cards. The credit lines are officially dead, Vince confirmed. Any automatic payments tied to those cards will bounce starting at midnight. Their gym memberships, their streaming services, their luxury meal deliveries, all of it will be declined. Good, I said, leaning back slightly. Now let us address my mother. I opened the recurring transfers tab and found Linda's next payment waiting in the system. 3 days from now, another enormous deposit would have landed in her account, under the familiar disguise of a trust fund disbursement. For a moment, my finger hovered over the command. Then I remembered her tossing that napkin at me and telling me not to make a scene over a cheap dress. I clicked delete. The scheduled payment vanished from the screen, and with it the illusion that had protected her for 10 years. The transfers are canceled, I stated. What is the current balance in her actual personal checking account? Vince checked his secondary screen, pulling up the linked data. She transferred her last disbursement to her savings to cover a kitchen renovation. She started last week, he reported. Her accessible liquid cash right now is roughly $400. $400. The woman who looked down her nose at my dress and ordered me to buy a cheap replacement had exactly $400 to her name. It was poetic. There is one last thing we need to handle, I said, pulling up a specialized corporate directory. The country club. My family's membership at the elite North Shore Country Club was the absolute cornerstone of their social existence. The initiation fee alone was staggering. When my father died, the club had been ready to revoke their membership due to unpaid dues. I had quietly stepped in, setting up a corporate sponsorship to cover the costs indefinitely. They think the trust pays the club dues, Vince said, watching me navigate the directory. They have no idea it is a corporate perk you authorize every year. I found the executive contact portal for the club's membership director. Because the membership was technically a corporate asset held by my firm, I had full administrative control. I opened the authorization list. Linda, Stephanie, Brad, and Caitlin were all listed as active VIP members. I drafted a swift formal email to the membership director. I informed him that effective immediately, Aura Lifestyle Management was revoking all guest privileges for the 4 individuals listed. I instructed him to deactivate their gate passes and alert the front desk that they were no longer permitted on the premises. I hit send. The moment the club opened in the morning, their access would be completely revoked. They would not be able to get past the security gate to play a round of tennis or order a cocktail. It is finally done, I said, pushing my keyboard away. The chaotic noise of my family's demands, the relentless criticism, the endless financial drain, it was all finally silenced. Vince slowly closed his laptop with a soft, satisfying click. You did the right thing, Meredith. They took your generosity for granted, and they abused your kindness. You do not owe them anything. I know, I replied, looking out the window at the dark city below. I gave them 10 years of comfort they did not earn. Now they get to experience the life my father actually left them. The financial architecture that had supported their arrogance was completely dismantled. In a matter of mere minutes, I had wiped out their endless credit lines, their entire cash flow, and their meticulously crafted social standing. They had built their identity around unlimited wealth without doing the work required to sustain it. When the sun rose tomorrow, they would step out into a cold world that no longer catered to their grand illusions. The safety net they never appreciated was gone, and they were about to hit the concrete of reality very hard. I managed to sleep for exactly 4 hours. When my eyes opened, the digital clock on my nightstand glowed with the time 4:30 in the morning. The penthouse was entirely silent, wrapping around me like a protective vault. I stepped onto the cold hardwood floor, feeling a profound sense of purpose. My mind was sharp, functioning with the precise clarity of a chief executive officer executing a hostile takeover. I walked into the kitchen and began preparing a pot of dark roast coffee. The scent of roasted beans filled the air, grounding me in the present moment. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city of Chicago slowly wake up beneath me. Streetlights flickered against the dark pavement, and a few early commuter trains snaked along the tracks in the distance. Out in the affluent North Shore suburbs, my family was still sound asleep. They were resting comfortably in their custom beds, wrapped in the luxurious ignorance I had provided for them over the last 10 years. Today, that ignorance would be forcibly stripped away. I poured my coffee into a ceramic mug and carried it down the hall to my home office. Sitting at my glass desk, I opened a specific encrypted file folder on my computer. The file was labeled Corporate Fleet. I clicked on the subfolder containing the lease agreement for a pristine alpine white luxury sport utility vehicle. 6 months ago, Stephanie and Brad had approached me with a demand rather than a request. Caitlin was turning 18, and they insisted she needed a luxury vehicle to match the status of her peers at her elite private high school. They assumed the non-existent family trust would simply absorb the cost. To maintain the illusion of their inherited wealth, I had arranged the acquisition myself. I leased the vehicle directly through my company, registering it as an executive transport car for my firm. I told Stephanie and Brad that structuring the lease through my business was simply a clever corporate tax loophole. They praised the financial maneuvering, believing they were outsmarting the government while spending their imaginary inheritance. They had absolutely no idea that my company held the exclusive legal title to the vehicle. In the eyes of the law, Caitlin was merely an authorized driver operating corporate property. She treated that expensive machine with the exact same careless disdain she showed to everyone around her. My company insurance had already processed 3 separate claims for minor accidents because Caitlin spent more time looking at her phone than the road. She regularly scraped the custom alloy wheels against suburban curbs. She believed the car was her absolute birthright. I was simply the invisible administrator who handled the maintenance bills. That dynamic was about to change permanently. I glanced at the clock on my monitor. It was exactly 5:15 in the morning. I picked up my cell phone and dialed a contact saved under a priority vendor list. Leo was the owner of a highly discreet towing and repossession firm that my company occasionally contracted for our high-net-worth clients. He answered on the first ring, his voice rough but entirely alert. "Good morning, Meredith," Leo said, the sound of a diesel engine idling in the background of his call. "I assume this is about the priority job you flagged in the system last night." "Good morning, Leo," I replied, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "Yes, the job is confirmed. I need you to execute a corporate asset recovery this morning. The vehicle is a white sport utility vehicle parked in the driveway of a residential property. I sent the exact address and the digital access codes to your secure portal last night." "I have the file open right now," Leo confirmed. "I see the corporate lease documents and the title establishing your firm as the sole legal owner. We are completely cleared for a standard repossession. What time do you want my truck in the driveway?" "I need you to pull up at exactly 6:50, I instructed him. The timing was not random. Stephanie always woke up at 7 to begin her morning routine. I wanted the tow truck securing the vehicle just moments before she looked out her front window. I wanted the absolute shock of the repossession to hit them before they even had a chance to pour a cup of coffee. 6:50 on the dot, Leo repeated. "We will secure the vehicle by the axles to prevent any damage to the drivetrain. You noted that the residents might become hostile. Do you want me to arrange for local police standby, just in case they decide to escalate the situation? That will not be necessary yet, I told him. They will scream and threaten you, but they will not want the police drawing attention to their financial issues with flashing lights and sirens. If they try to stop you physically, just hand them the corporate legal notice I provided and tell them to contact the legal department at my office. Under no circumstances are you to release that vehicle back to them once the hooks are attached. You pay me to recover assets, Meredith not to argue with angry suburbanites. Leo chuckled softly. The car is coming back to your secure downtown lot. I will send you the tracking link right now so you can monitor our approach. Thank you, Leo, I said. I will be waiting for your confirmation. I ended the call and set my phone on the desk. I clicked the secure message, and a digital map of the greater Chicago area filled my secondary monitor. A small blue dot represented Leo's heavy-duty flatbed tow truck. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet anticipation wash over me. The trap was set, and the execution was currently cruising up the interstate at 60 miles per hour. For the next hour, I sat in the stillness of my office drinking coffee and watching the blue dot progress closer and closer to the affluent enclave. The sky outside my window slowly shifted from pitch black to a bruised shade of violet as dawn approached. I thought about Caitlin waking up and reaching for the keys to a car that was no longer hers. I needed this. I checked the time on my desk clock. 6:40. The truck was only 5 minutes away from their sprawling estate. My heart beat with a steady rhythmic calmness. I opened the live camera feed connected to the dashboard of Leo's truck. 6:45. The truck turned onto their specific street. The sprawling brick facade of my sister's house came into view on the screen. There, parked arrogantly in the center of the circular paver driveway, was the white luxury vehicle. 6:48. Leo's truck slowed to a crawl. The harsh amber warning lights on the top of the cab began to flash, reflecting off the dark windows of the house. I watched through the camera feed as the heavy vehicle carefully backed into the driveway, aligning its rear bed perfectly with the front bumper of the sport utility vehicle. The sheer mechanical precision of the movement was deeply satisfying. The digital clock on my monitor rolled over to 6:50. Through the silent video feed, I could see Leo stepping out of the cab, wearing a high-visibility reflective jacket. He moved with practiced efficiency, unspooling the thick steel cables and grabbing the heavy metal hooks from the side of the flatbed. The hydraulic winch whined into action, a piercing mechanical sound that shattered the tranquil morning silence of the wealthy neighborhood. Leo knelt beside the front tires, securing the heavy chains to the reinforced mounting points. Slowly, the front tires of the luxury vehicle lifted off the expensive paving stones. The physical repossession was officially underway, and the aggressive mechanical noises were actively destroying the quiet morning. I kept my eyes locked on the video feed, watching the front door of the massive brick house wait for the inevitable chaos to begin. The heavy oak front door swung open with such force that it bounced against the brick exterior. Stephanie burst onto the front porch wearing a flowing emerald green silk robe that billowed wildly in the crisp morning wind. She practically sprinted down the walkway, her bare feet slapping against the cold paving stones. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure suburban outrage. A second later, the front window of the second-floor bedroom slammed open. Caitlin leaned out, pushing her messy blonde hair out of her eyes. She stared down at the driveway in absolute horror, watching the steel cables pull her prized possession upward. "Mom, stop him!" Caitlin shrieked, her voice cracking with panic. "What is he doing to my car?" Stephanie reached the edge of the driveway, waving her arms frantically as the hydraulic winch continued to groan. "Hey, you stop right there!" she screamed, her voice shrill and commanding. "Put that car down immediately. You have the wrong house. Do you have any idea who we are? Put it down before I have you arrested." Through the dashboard camera feed, I watched Leo pause his work. He did not look intimidated or rushed. He calmly secured the secondary chains over the front axles, ensuring the vehicle was perfectly stabilized on the metal bed of his truck. He wore a high-visibility jacket, and his posture radiated the calm indifference of a man who dealt with screaming rich people on a daily basis. He finished tightening the heavy straps before turning to face my furious sister. Stephanie marched right up to the side of the flatbed truck, her face flushed with indignation. I said, "Stop what you are doing," she demanded, crossing her arms tightly across her chest to ward off the morning chill. That vehicle belongs to my daughter. It was purchased through our family trust fund, and you are attempting to steal it in broad daylight. I am giving you exactly 3 seconds to unhook those chains, or I am calling the police and pressing grand theft charges. Leo wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag he pulled from his back pocket. He looked at Stephanie with a mild, almost bored expression. Mom, I am going to need you to step back from the recovery vehicle, he said, his voice projecting clearly through the audio feed on my computer. This is a lawful repossession of corporate assets. I have all the necessary legal paperwork authorizing the immediate removal of this property. Corporate assets. Stephanie spat the words out as if they tasted foul. You are completely insane. My husband is an executive. My father built a massive real estate empire. There is no corporate lease. This is our private property. You are nothing but a common thief trying to target a wealthy neighborhood. Caitlin, call your father down here right now. Tell Brad to bring his phone and call the police chief. We play golf with him every Sunday. Caitlin disappeared from the upstairs window, and a moment later the front door opened again. She ran out wearing oversized sweatpants and designer slippers, holding her phone like a weapon. She began recording the scene immediately, holding the device high in the air. You are going to jail, Caitlin yelled, her voice shaking with teenage entitlement. I am streaming this right now. Everyone is going to see you trying to steal my car. Leo did not even flinch at the threat of the camera. He simply walked to the cab of his truck and opened the driver's side door. He pulled out a thick manila folder and a crisp white business card. He walked back toward Stephanie, stopping just outside her personal space. I am not here to argue with you, Mom, Leo stated firmly, holding out the folder. He kept his tone strictly professional, refusing to be baited by their escalating hysteria. I am a licensed recovery agent contracted by the legal owner of this vehicle. The title is held by Aura Lifestyle Management. The lease terms have been officially terminated by the Chief Executive Officer. You are no longer authorized to operate or possess this machinery. If you have a grievance regarding this recovery, you can direct it to the legal department listed on that card. Stephanie snatched the folder from his hands, her eyes blazing with fury. She ripped open the top flap, pulling out the copies of the vehicle title and the corporate lease agreement. Her eyes scanned the documents rapidly. I watched her expression shift from aggressive certainty to profound confusion. She stared at the letters spelling out the name of my company, Aura Lifestyle Management. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then she looked down at the crisp white business card Leo had handed her. It was one of my premium corporate cards. It featured my direct office line and my name embossed in heavy silver foil. Meredith Preston, Chief Executive Officer. Stephanie stood frozen in the middle of her expensive driveway. The cold morning wind whipped her silk robe around her legs, but she did not seem to feel the chill anymore. The shock of recognizing my company name on an official repossession document had completely paralyzed her. She looked up from the business card and stared blankly at the front grille of the vehicle, now securely strapped to the tow truck. What does it say, Mom? Caitlin demanded, stomping her slippered foot against the pavement. Tell him to drop my car right now. Dad is coming downstairs and he is going to ruin this guy. We are going to sue his entire company. Stephanie did not answer her daughter. She just kept staring at the business card, her mind desperately trying to process how her sister, the woman she had mocked and degraded just 12 hours ago, possessed the legal authority to seize her daughter's vehicle. The fragile walls of her fabricated reality were cracking right there on the cold suburban concrete. Leo took advantage of her stunned silence. He turned his back on them and climbed effortlessly into the cab of his truck. The powerful diesel engine roared as he shifted into gear. The amber lights continued to flash, casting rhythmic shadows across the lawn. He released the air brakes with a loud, sharp hiss that made Caitlin jump backward in surprise. Brad finally burst through the front door, rushing down the walkway while struggling to tie the belt of his robe. He looked disheveled and angry, ready to exert his corporate authority over a working-class tow driver. But he was entirely too late. Leo pressed the accelerator, The massive truck lurched forward, pulling the luxury vehicle down the street and away from the sprawling estate. Caitlin screamed in frustration, watching her beloved status symbol disappear around the corner. She turned to her mother, demanding an explanation, but Stephanie remained completely speechless, gripping my business card as if it had burned her hand. Brad reached them, shouting questions into the cold morning air. Sitting in my quiet downtown penthouse, I reached forward and closed the video feed. A profound sense of tranquility washed over my entire body. I took the last sip of my dark roast coffee, feeling the warmth settle in my chest. The first domino had officially fallen. I stood up from my glass desk and walked toward my expansive master closet to select a sharp, tailored suit. It was time to prepare for their inevitable arrival at my office. By 8:30, I was seated behind the walnut desk in my corner office at Aura Lifestyle Management. My assistant Chloe brought me my coffee, setting it down with her usual silent efficiency. I checked my calendar. The stage was perfectly set. I simply had to wait. It took them exactly 2 hours to navigate morning traffic. I knew they arrived when the quiet of my corporate suite was suddenly shattered by my mother's shrill voice echoing down the hallway. The heavy glass doors at the front reception area banged open with enough force to rattle the frames. "Excuse me, you cannot go back there without an appointment," I heard Chloe say, her usually calm voice tight with alarm. "Ms. Preston is currently unavailable." "Do not you dare tell me where I can and cannot go," Linda snapped back. "I am her mother, and this is a family emergency. Get out of my way right now." Footsteps stomped aggressively across the hardwood floors, growing louder as they approached. I remained seated, keeping my hands folded neatly on my desk. The heavy oak door flew open, hitting the wall stop with a loud thud. Stephanie and Linda marched into the room, vibrating with a mixture of panic and fury. Chloe appeared in the doorway behind them, holding her security badge. "I am sorry," Meredith, Chloe said. They pushed right past the security desk and refused to wait in the reception lounge. "I can call building security to have them escorted out." "It is perfectly fine, Chloe," I said. "You can go back to your desk. I will handle this personally. Please hold my incoming calls and ensure we are not interrupted." Chloe nodded and pulled the heavy oak door shut behind her, sealing the three of us inside. I looked at my mother and sister. They were a chaotic mess of suburban entitlement. Stephanie was wearing expensive designer yoga pants, but her face was flushed red. Linda was clutching her signature leather handbag to her chest, breathing in short, ragged gasps. Neither bothered to offer a greeting or acknowledge the professional environment they had invaded. Linda reached my desk first, breathless with outrage. Her country club card had been rejected at the front gate that morning in front of the women she spent her entire life trying to impress. Stephanie came in right behind her, waving my business card like evidence from a crime scene. Caitlin's car had been towed. Every platinum card in Stephanie's wallet had died before breakfast. Brad was already threatening lawyers. "This is obviously a banking error," Stephanie snapped. "Or some mistake you made with your little business paperwork. Fix it, Meredith, right now." I looked at Stephanie's snapping fingers and then slowly shifted my gaze up to meet her angry, impatient eyes. The sheer audacity of her demands hanging in the quiet air of my office was almost beautiful in its pure, unfiltered arrogance. They had absolutely no concept of the ground they were standing on. They thought they had marched into my office to issue orders to a subordinate. They did not realize they had just willingly walked directly into the center of a very deliberate and meticulously constructed trap. "There is no bank error, Stephanie," I said, my voice dropping to a cool, measured whisper that forced them to stop talking and listen closely. "I did not mess up any paperwork. The bank did not accidentally cancel your platinum cards. The country club did not experience a system glitch when they denied your access at the gate this morning. And the tow truck driver was following my exact specific instructions when he removed that vehicle from your driveway." Linda frowned, her perfectly drawn eyebrows pulling together in deep confusion. "What are you talking about, Meredith? If there is no bank error, then why is the trust fund locking us out of our accounts?" I reached out and opened the top drawer of my desk. The smooth, quiet sound of the metal glides seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence of the room. I withdrew a thick, black leather binder, containing the exact financial ledgers my wealth manager Vince had prepared for me the night before. I placed the heavy binder gently onto the glass surface of my desk, right between my mother and my sister. The dark leather contrasted sharply with the sleek, transparent glass. "That is exactly what we need to discuss, Mom," I replied, resting my hands quietly on top of the heavy black binder. I slowly flipped open the thick leather cover of the binder. The first page was a certified copy of my father's estate settlement dated exactly 10 years ago. I rotated the heavy binder so it faced them directly. "What is this?" Stephanie asked, looking down at the dense legal text. "That is the final probate and bankruptcy filing for the Preston family estate," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "When Dad died 10 years ago, he did not leave behind a massive fortune. The family trust you love to brag about was completely liquidated to pay off furious creditors." Linda let out a sharp, dismissive laugh, waving her hand. "We have been living off the trust for a decade. You are just trying to confuse us with fabricated paperwork because you made a legal mistake with Caitlin's car." "Turn the page, Mom," I instructed, my tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. Stephanie reached out and hesitantly flipped the heavy parchment page. The next section contained the detailed banking transfers from the past 10 years. 10 years ago, I made a quiet, confidential arrangement with the estate lawyers. I explained slowly, making sure every word landed with maximum impact. "I knew you could not handle the humiliation of losing your social status. As I built my company, I started quietly funneling my corporate dividends into a dummy account. That account was specifically coded and scheduled to look exactly like a trust fund disbursement. Every single dollar you have spent over the last decade came directly from my personal earnings." Stephanie stared at the pages, her breathing suddenly shallow. "No, that is impossible. Dad was wealthy." "He was a fraud," I corrected her coldly. "And I have been paying millions of dollars to maintain his illusion. I paid the mortgage on your house, Stephanie. I paid the maintenance fees for Mom to sit at the country club. I funded Caitlin's expensive private school tuition, her wardrobe, and her brand new Range Rover. Every luxury vacation and expensive steak dinner Brad charged was paid for by the woman you called an errand girl." The reality of my words acted as a heavy anchor, pulling them under. I watched the realization wash over my mother's face. The color drained completely from her cheeks, leaving her looking pale and suddenly very old. She clutched her leather handbag closer to her chest. Instead of thanking me, their shock rapidly mutated into vicious self-preservation. Linda straightened her posture, her eyes narrowing into cold, hateful slits. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my face. "You manipulative little sociopath," she hissed, her voice dripping with pure venom. "You have been holding this over our heads for 10 years. You kept us completely in the dark so you could play God with our lives. This is severe financial abuse, Meredith. You deliberately isolated us from the truth just so you could pull the rug out from under us the moment we did not bow down to your every demand." I looked at her, genuinely astounded by the incredible mental gymnastics required to reach that conclusion. Financial abuse. "Mom," I asked, keeping my voice perfectly calm, "I gave you millions of dollars of my own hard-earned money and asked for absolutely nothing in return. I let you live a life of pure luxury. All I expected was basic human decency, which you could not even manage on my own birthday." "You did this to control us," Linda shouted, slamming her hand against the desk. "You wanted to watch us dance like puppets while you sat back and felt superior. You are sick. You are a deeply damaged individual, and you always have been. You set this whole thing up just to humiliate your sister and your niece." Stephanie found her voice then, and it was sharp with desperate aggression. She grabbed the edge of the binder as if she wanted to tear the pages out and destroy the evidence. "This is a complete lie," she declared, her voice shaking with rage. "I know exactly how business works, Meredith. You did not build a multi-million-dollar company out of thin air at 24 years old. You stole our inheritance. You took the real trust fund and used it as seed money for this stupid concierge business. Now you are fabricating these ledgers to cover your tracks because you know Brad is going to find out. The probate documents are certified by the federal bankruptcy court, Stephanie, I pointed out smoothly. You can hire any forensic accountant in the state of Illinois to verify them. The records are public if you know where to look. Oh, we will, Stephanie snarled, leaning across the desk until her face was inches from mine. Brad is going to absolutely destroy you for this. You think you can just cancel our credit cards and steal my daughter's car without consequences. Brad is a powerful corporate executive. He has access to a team of ruthless, aggressive corporate lawyers. We are going to sue you for embezzlement fraud and severe emotional distress. We are going to take this entire company away from you and expose you to everyone in Chicago as the thief you really are. I met her furious gaze with a look of absolute unbothered calm. I had spent 10 years dreading this exact confrontation, fearing the agonizing moment they discovered the truth. But now that it was actually happening, I felt nothing but profound, immense relief. Their threats were as empty as their bank accounts. I invite you to try, Stephanie. I said, my voice soft but laced with unbreakable steel. Have Brad call his high-powered corporate lawyers today. Have them subpoena my corporate records and my personal accounts. I will gladly hand over every single financial document that proves you have been living completely off my charity for a decade. But before you start writing checks for massive legal retainers, you might want to check your actual bank balances. Corporate lawyers require significant cash retainers, and as of this morning, neither of you has a single dime to your name. Linda gasped loudly, clutching her chest as if I had physically driven a knife into her ribs. You cannot do this to us, she whispered, her voice cracking. We are your family. You cannot just leave us with nothing. You made it perfectly clear last night that I do not belong in this family, I replied smoothly, reaching forward and closing the heavy leather binder with a definitive loud snap. You told me I was an embarrassment to the family. You told me my business was a pathetic joke. You told me I was cheap. Well, now you both get to experience exactly what cheap actually feels like. Stephanie grabbed her mother's arm, pulling her roughly away from the desk. Come on, Mom, she ordered, her voice tight with panic and rage. We are not staying in this office to listen to these ridiculous lies. Brad will know how to handle this situation. He is going to crush her. They turned and marched toward the heavy oak door. I watched them go, feeling the last remaining invisible threads, tying me to them, snap and dissolve completely. They were storming out to plot a vicious legal war. They had absolutely no financial resources to fight. And they still had absolutely no idea that Brad's own perfect corporate world was about to collapse right alongside theirs. I sat alone in my office. I walked to the windows, looking down at the Chicago streets. The truth was finally out. The massive weight I had carried was gone. I walked back to my desk, taking a sip of my coffee. It was the sound of true independence. A moment later, the digital phone on my desk began to flash. The caller identification displayed a familiar corporate number. It was Brad calling from his executive suite. He must have received the frantic call from Stephanie outside my building. I let the phone ring 3 times before I pressed the speaker button. Hello, Brad, I said. Do not play games with me, Meredith, Brad barked. He sounded absolutely unhinged. The smooth executive persona was gone, replaced by raw panic. Stephanie just called me from your lobby, crying hysterically. She told me some insane fabricated story about the trust fund being bankrupt and you claiming to have paid for everything. I do not know what kind of sick manipulation you are trying to pull, but it ends now. It is not a fabricated story, Brad, I replied smoothly. The trust was liquidated 10 years ago to pay off debt. Every dollar your family spent over the last decade came from my corporate accounts, and as of last night, that funding is terminated. You will need to start living on your actual salary. Brad let out a harsh bark of laughter. You really expect me to believe that a glorified secretary secretly funded my life? I am a senior vice president. I close deals worth millions of dollars before you finish your morning coffee. My father-in-law left a massive estate. You are just bitter. You are trying to use this fake banking error to punish Caitlin for a harmless mistake she made. Throwing wine on a $4,000 dress is not a harmless mistake, Brad, I pointed out. And if you are confident about that massive estate, I suggest you call the estate lawyers. Their contact information is public record. Ask them to verify the bankruptcy filings from 10 years ago. I am not calling anyone, Brad shouted, slamming his fist down on something heavy. You are going to log back into whatever portal you hacked into and restore our credit lines immediately. Then you are going to call that towing company and have my daughter's vehicle returned to my driveway completely undamaged. If you do not do exactly as I say, I will end you. You will end me, I repeated the threat back to him. Yes, Brad sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. You seem to have forgotten how the real business world works, Meredith. You run a boutique errand service. You rely on corporate contracts to keep the lights on. My corporation is one of your biggest clients. We pay your firm a massive retainer every single year to handle our corporate retreats and executive travel logistics. I am the man who signs the authorization for that contract. He paused, clearly expecting me to beg for my livelihood. When I remained completely silent, he continued, his voice rising with malice. I will pull the contract, Brad threatened. I will call procurement, revoke your vendor status, and make sure nobody in this city works with your pathetic little company again. I let him finish. He truly believed his company's account was the pillar holding Aura upright. He had no idea it represented less than 2% of my annual revenue. Brad, I said calmly, you should worry less about bankrupting my company and more about keeping your own house standing. Your wife has no working cards, your daughter has no car, and the mortgage payment is due in 6 days. My company will survive without you. I am not sure your family will survive without me. I reached forward and pressed the bright red button on the phone console, cutting the connection instantly. The quiet, peaceful atmosphere of my office returned rapidly, rushing in to fill the empty space left by his loud, aggressive voice. I took a deep breath, letting the silence wash over my mind. Brad genuinely thought he was going to use his corporate position to crush my spirit and force me back into quiet submission. He was absolutely certain he held the ultimate trump card. But Brad was an incredibly foolish man. He had spent years relying on my company to manage his firm corporate retreats without ever bothering to understand the full scope of our specialized services. Aura Lifestyle Management did not just book luxury hotel rooms and hire catering companies for his corporate events. My firm provided highly detailed logistics management, which included deeply auditing the specific perk spending for all their senior executives. We handled the complex expense reports to ensure the corporation was getting the absolute best possible return on their financial investments. Brad had blindly threatened to destroy my company using his corporate influence. He had essentially demanded that I open his professional file and examine his actual value to the firm. It was an open invitation I was more than happy to accept. I reached across my glass desk and pressed the silver intercom button, preparing to connect directly to my lead forensic accountant working just down the hallway. It was finally time to expose every single dark financial secret he had carefully hidden from his incredibly demanding corporate superiors. I pressed the silver intercom button on my console and asked Nina to send Evan into my office. Evan was the head of my forensic accounting division. He was a brilliant, meticulous man who treated corporate ledgers like a complex puzzle that always possessed a definitive mathematical solution. Less than a minute later, Evan knocked gently on the heavy oak door and stepped inside, holding a secure digital tablet. He took the leather chair opposite my desk, sitting right where my mother had been vibrating with misguided rage just an hour earlier. I need a complete comprehensive audit of a specific executive account, I told him, keeping my voice strictly professional. The client is Vanguard Logistics. The executive is Brad Masterson. Evan tapped his tablet, bringing up the master file for the firm. Vanguard Logistics was a massive corporate account. We managed their annual executive summits, their board of directors, travel logistics, and their high-level corporate entertainment. But part of that lucrative contract included a rigorous quarterly audit of their senior management expense accounts to ensure strict compliance with federal tax regulations. Brad Masterson. Evan repeated, his eyes scanning the digital file. He is a senior vice president. He travels extensively for the firm. We process his corporate expense reports every single month. Is there a specific discrepancy you want me to look for today? I want you to look for absolutely everything, I instructed, my tone hardening. Brad just called my direct line and threatened to leverage his position to terminate our entire contract. He believes he is completely untouchable. I want to know exactly how he is spending his company money. Pull his travel logs, his corporate credit card statements, his client entertainment receipts, and his luxury accommodation invoices. Cross-reference every single dollar he has expensed over the last 36 months. Leave no stone unturned. Evan nodded, his expression turning sharp and deeply focused. A threat to pull a massive contract was a direct challenge to the integrity of our firm, and Evan took his job very seriously. He stood up and left the office, promising to return as soon as his specialized data mining software finished compiling the raw numbers. While I waited, I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows again. The morning sun was fully illuminating the Chicago skyline, now burning away the early autumn chill. Brad genuinely believed he held the absolute power in our family dynamic. He had married my sister when I was still struggling to get Aura Lifestyle Management off the ground. He had spent the last decade treating me like a pathetic failure, completely unaware that I was the person systematically reviewing every single financial move he made on behalf of his company. In the corporate world, executive perks were often abused, but Vanguard Logistics was particularly strict about their internal compliance. They paid my firm a premium to act as an independent external auditor, specifically because their board of directors wanted absolute transparency. If an executive expensed a 5-star dinner, they needed to prove a legitimate client was sitting across the table. If they booked a private jet for a scouting trip, they needed to provide the subsequent real estate contracts. Brad thought my company only planned the extravagant holiday parties. He had absolutely no idea we also held the magnifying glass over his personal expense receipts. 45 minutes passed in quiet anticipation. The muffled hum of the city traffic below served as a soothing backdrop to my racing thoughts. I pictured Brad sitting in his corner office, probably pacing frantically around his mahogany desk, desperately trying to figure out how to pay his massive mortgage without the trust fund money backing him up. He was likely drafting an aggressive email to his legal department right now, trying to figure out a way to sue me for terminating his limitless credit cards. The heavy oak door finally opened and Evan walked back in. He did not sit down this time. He walked straight to my desk and placed his tablet flat on the glass surface, sliding it deliberately toward me. His face was entirely devoid of any professional amusement. "You were right to request the deep audit," Evan said, his voice low and serious. "Brad Masterson is not just casually abusing corporate perks. He is actively committing massive corporate fraud. He has been systematically embezzling company funds for at least 3 years." I looked down at the tablet. The screen displayed a meticulously organized spreadsheet highlighting hundreds of red flag transactions. I tapped the first expanded file. It was a detailed travelogue spanning the previous 18 months of his employment. "Look at his client scouting trips," Evan instructed, pointing to a cluster of highlighted flights. "He has been expensing luxury weekend trips to Miami, Los Angeles, and Aspen. He claims these are critical business development retreats to secure new logistics warehouses. But the return flights never match up with any actual property tours or legitimate client meetings. So where exactly is he going?" I asked, scrolling through the astronomical hotel bills. Evan tapped the screen, bringing up a secondary file containing the guest manifests for the luxury resorts. "He is booking dual occupancy penthouse suites." The secondary guest listed on all of these invoices is a woman named Vanessa. She is not an employee of Vanguard Logistics, and she is certainly not a client. Based on the couple's spa charges, the expensive room service bills, and the luxury boutique purchases Brad has been expensing entirely to the company, it is very clear she is his mistress. He has spent over $120,000 of corporate money funding luxury vacations for his girlfriend under the guise of business development. I stared at the numbers glowing on the screen. $120,000. While Stephanie was busy mocking my wardrobe and demanding I pay for teenage music festival packages, her perfect corporate husband was flying another woman around the country on his company dime. The sheer hypocrisy was staggering. And that is just the beginning. Evan continued, his voice tight with professional disgust. The travel fraud is arrogant and sloppy, but the vendor payments are where he is really burying the stolen money. Pull up the consulting fees tab at the bottom of the screen. I tapped the screen, switching to a ledger titled Independent Consulting Expenditures. Brad had personally authorized dozens of massive payments to a third-party logistics consulting firm based out of Nevada. The payments were vaguely categorized as advanced market research and internal risk assessment fees. That consulting firm does not exist, Evan explained. I ran the tax identification numbers through the federal database. It is a fake shell company registered to a vacant post office box in Las Vegas. Brad is approving these massive invoices and routing Vanguard Logistics money directly into this ghost account. Why Nevada? I asked, my mind quickly connecting the dark financial dots. I pulled the wire routing numbers from the shell company, Evans said. The money does not stay in that account for more than 24 hours. It is immediately wired into private accounts held by 3 different high-limit casinos on the Las Vegas Strip. Brad is not conducting vital market research. He is illegally siphoning corporate funds to pay off massive hidden gambling debts. He has funneled nearly $400,000 over the last 2 years alone to cover his casino losses. I sat back, letting the magnitude of his stupidity wash over me. $400,000 stolen from his employer to cover gambling debts while his wife paraded around pretending they were royalty. Brad was not just a terrible husband. He was a desperate criminal standing on a massive cliff. I looked at Evan, who was packing up his tablet. I want every piece of this data formally certified, I told him. Export the wire transfer logs, the hotel manifest, the fake invoices, and the casino routing numbers. I want a comprehensive dossier printed by Friday. Do not flag any of this to their compliance department yet. I will handle the delivery personally. Evan nodded, offering a sharp professional gesture. I will have the complete certified file on your desk by Friday morning, Meredith. He walked out, leaving me alone with the truth. The morning passed in a busy blur of corporate meetings and client phone calls. I forced myself to carefully compartmentalize the family drama, focusing entirely on Aura lifestyle management. But by late afternoon, the fragile silence I enjoyed was aggressively shattered. It started with a single text message from a cousin asking if I was experiencing a severe mental health crisis. Before I could type a confused reply, another message arrived from a high school friend expressing deep concern for my mother. Within 10 minutes, my cell phone was vibrating continuously, a relentless stream of notifications. I unlocked my device and opened my social media applications. The direct cause of the sudden digital avalanche was immediately apparent. Stephanie had decided that if she could not bully me in person, she would destroy my personal reputation publicly. Right at the top of my timeline feed was a massive post written by Stephanie. She had tagged dozens of extended family members, mutual friends, and wealthy socialites. The post included a carefully selected, heavily filtered photograph of my mother looking frail and deeply distressed, sitting on her sofa with a tissue pressed to her eyes. Below the image, Stephanie wove a malicious narrative. By late afternoon, my phone began vibrating non-stop. Cousins, old classmates, and women from my mother's country club were all sending the same concerned question in different words. Was I having a mental breakdown? Then I saw Stephanie's post. She had uploaded a filtered photo of Linda crying on the sofa and written that I had hacked our elderly mother's account, stolen Caitlin's car, and suffered a jealous psychological break. The comments were already flooded with sympathy for them and hatred for me. Chloe buzzed my office a few minutes later. Meredith reception is getting calls from country club members. Some of them are threatening to contact the local news. I stared at the screen, feeling the old instinct to defend myself rise in my chest. I could have posted the bankruptcy papers. I could have exposed every dollar I had spent keeping them alive. But that was exactly the fight they wanted. So I muted the notifications, turned my phone face down, and went back to work. Every lie they posted was another piece of evidence. I was not going to argue with them online. I was going to let the truth arrive with paperwork. I left my office shortly after 6 that evening. The drive back to my River North penthouse was slow moving through the dense Chicago rush hour traffic. I leaned my head against the leather headrest of the town car, watching the city lights blur together in the fading twilight. The day had been incredibly long and emotionally taxing, but I felt a strong underlying sense of calm. I had successfully navigated the first wave of their coordinated attacks. I assumed the evening would finally bring a much-needed moment of quiet solitude. I planned to pour a glass of wine, run a hot bath, and prepare myself mentally for the inevitable legal posturing Brad would undoubtedly attempt the following day. But as I stepped into my penthouse and dropped my keys onto the marble entryway console, the intercom system connected to the ground floor lobby began to buzz violently. The sound was harsh and urgent, completely shattering the peaceful atmosphere of my home. The voice on the intercom was not calm tonight. Thomas from the lobby sounded strained, and behind him I could hear a girl screaming. "Miss Preston, your niece is downstairs. She slipped through behind another resident and is demanding access to your private elevator. She's threatening the staff." I came down in the same tailored suit I had worn all day. The elevator doors opened to a marble lobby that looked like it had been invaded by a storm. Caitlin stood near the concierge desk, red-faced hair tangled, phone raised like a weapon. The moment she saw me, she marched forward. "You stole my car." "No," I said. "I recovered corporate property." Her expression twisted. "My dad is going to destroy you." "Your father has his own problems now," I replied. "And you are 18, Caitlin, which means tonight, for the first time in your life, the consequences belong to you." I reached into my tailored leather tote bag and pulled out a crisp, white envelope. I had instructed my fleet manager to prepare these specific corporate documents this afternoon, fully anticipating that Caitlin would eventually track me down and demand her car back. I held the thick envelope out toward her. "Take it," I instructed. Caitlin stared at the white paper as if it were coated in toxic poison. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, refusing to reach out. "What is that?" she demanded, her voice dropping to a suspicious sneer. "A fake apology letter. Because I am not reading it. You need to apologize to me on video right now so I can post it on my social media accounts and show everyone the truth." "It is not an apology letter," I said, stepping forward and gently but firmly pressing the envelope against her chest until she instinctively raised her hands to take it. "It is an itemized invoice." Caitlin frowned, her perfectly plucked eyebrows drawing together in deep confusion. She ripped open the flap of the envelope and pulled out the 3 pages of dense corporate paperwork. The document featured the official Aura Lifestyle Management letterhead at the top and a long, detailed list of mechanical and cosmetic assessments. "What is this garbage?" she asked, scanning the first page rapidly. "Why are you giving me a bill for car repairs? When my recovery agent secured the vehicle this morning, I had it transported directly to our certified corporate mechanic," I explained, my voice echoing slightly in the large, quiet lobby. "The vehicle belongs to my company, but you were the authorized driver. And as the authorized driver, you treated that expensive piece of machinery with absolute careless disdain. The mechanic conducted a comprehensive bumper-to-bumper inspection today. You severely curbed all 4 custom alloy wheels, requiring them to be completely replaced. You spilled coffee and sugary drinks all over the premium leather interior, causing deep, permanent stains that require specialized chemical extraction. You backed into something hard enough to dent the rear quarter panel and crack the taillight assembly without ever reporting the damage to the insurance company. And most importantly, you completely ignored the digital dashboard warnings and skipped the last 2 mandatory oil changes, causing premature wear on the engine components." Caitlin rolled her eyes loudly, crumpling the edges of the thick paper in her fists. "I do not care about any of this stupid car mechanic stuff," she whined. "It is just a car. My dad pays the insurance and he pays for the maintenance. Send this stupid bill to him. I am not reading it." "I suggest you look at the total amount due at the bottom of the last page, Caitlin," I said, ignoring her whining. She flipped to the 3rd page, her eyes darting to the bold print at the bottom of the invoice. Her mouth fell open, and all the angry flush instantly drained out of her face, leaving her looking pale and suddenly very young. $8,000, she gasped, looking up at me in pure shock. "You are charging me $8,000 for a few tiny scratches. You are insane. I am not paying this. Send it to my dad." "I cannot send it to Brad," I replied smoothly. "Brad did not sign the authorized driver agreement." "You did. On your 18th birthday, you signed the corporate liability waiver, allowing you to legally operate an Aura lifestyle management fleet vehicle. That signature made you legally and financially responsible for any damages incurred outside of standard normal wear and tear. You are 18 years old, Caitlin. You are legally an adult in the eyes of the law. Your father cannot shield you from this debt. That invoice belongs entirely to you." Caitlin's hands began to shake slightly, making the thick paper rattle. "I do not have $8,000, she stammered, her tough facade rapidly crumbling under the heavy weight of actual consequences. "I am a high school student. I do not have a job. How am I supposed to pay this massive bill?" "That is a very good question," I said, offering her a cold, unsympathetic smile. "You have a few options. You could sell that massive collection of designer handbags sitting in your closet. You could go down to the local fast food drive-thru and fill out an employment application. Or you could take a weekend shift folding clothes at the mall. But you need to figure it out quickly because you have exactly 30 days to remit the full payment to my corporate accounting department." "And what if I just do not pay it?" Caitlin challenged, trying to summon back her earlier arrogant rage. "What are you going to do? Sue your own niece? You would look like a complete monster to everyone." "I will not need to sue you," I explained, my voice dropping to a quiet, serious whisper. "If the balance is not paid in full by the 30th day, my accounting department will automatically sell the debt to a third-party commercial collections agency." "Do you know what happens when a debt goes to collections, Caitlin? It gets permanently attached to your social security number. It will completely destroy your credit score before you even graduate high school." Caitlin stared at me, her eyes wide with mounting terror as the absolute reality of my words began to sink in. "Let me paint a very clear picture of your future if you ignore this bill. When you apply for private student loans, lenders will see the collection account. When you try to rent your first apartment, landlords will see it. When you apply for your first real credit card, you will be rejected before you even finish the application. Your entire wealthy image has been built on other people paying for you, Caitlin. Once this debt attaches to your name, you will spend years trying to prove you are not the careless, spoiled girl this paper says you are." Tears finally welled up in her eyes, spilling over her lower lashes and ruining her carefully applied makeup. "You cannot do this to me," she whispered, her voice cracking with genuine fear. "Please, Aunt Meredith. I am sorry about the wine. I am sorry about what I said at the restaurant last night. Please just make this go away." It was the first time she had ever apologized to me, but it was entirely empty. She was not sorry for her cruel behavior. She was only sorry that she was finally being held accountable. "Welcome to the real world, Caitlin," I said, turning away from her. "The payment instructions are printed on the back of the invoice. Good luck with your job hunt." I walked back towards the private elevator, leaving her standing alone in the massive marble lobby, weeping over an $8,000 bill she had absolutely no way to pay. The heavy steel doors slid shut, silencing her sobs completely, and I pressed the button to ascend back to the quiet peace of my penthouse. Friday arrived, bringing with it the crisp chill of a late autumn morning in Chicago. I spent the day finalizing the extensive forensic accounting dossier with Evan, ensuring every single document proving Brad masterminded the embezzlement scheme was perfectly bound and certified. But as the sun dipped below the skyline, my focus shifted entirely to the evening ahead. Vanguard Logistics was hosting its annual philanthropic gala at a historic luxury hotel in the heart of the city. It was the most important social and corporate event of the year for Brad, and by extension for my mother and sister. They treated this specific gala as their personal royal coronation. I walked into my master bedroom and unzipped the heavy protective garment bag hanging on the back of my closet door. Inside was the bespoke midnight blue silk dress I had worn to my birthday dinner. After Caitlin threw her temper tantrum and ruined it with red wine, I had sent the garment to a specialized restoration dry cleaner who worked exclusively with high-end couture. They had meticulously extracted every single drop of the dark stain, restoring the delicate fabric to its original flawless condition. Slipping the cool silk over my shoulders felt like putting on a suit of armor. I paired the dress with a simple pair of diamond stud earrings and classic silver heels. I did not need to wear loud, heavily sequined gowns to demand attention the way my sister did. True power was always quiet. My private driver dropped me off at the grand entrance of the hotel just after 8 o'clock. The sweeping stone staircase was lined with photographers and velvet ropes directing the wealthy guests toward the main ballroom. I checked my tailored coat at the front desk and walked through the massive gilded double doors. The space was breathtakingly opulent. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted fresco ceilings, casting a warm golden light over the hundreds of attendees. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with expensive champagne flutes and delicate appetizers. A live jazz orchestra played softly on an elevated stage in the corner, providing a sophisticated soundtrack to the wealthy corporate networking happening all around them. Vanguard. Logistics had built the evening to look untouchable. Champagne chandeliers, investors' cameras, and Brad standing near the bar as if he owned the room. Stephanie and Linda were there too, dressed carefully enough to hide the panic of the last 3 days. Their cards were dead. Their club access was gone. Their house was days from becoming a problem they could no longer ignore. Still, they smiled for the room because appearances were the last currency they had left. I saw Brad laughing with a group of junior executives, completely unaware that the certified dossier on his gambling debts and his mistress was already waiting in a secure room upstairs. I took a deep breath and began to walk slowly into the main reception area. The midnight blue silk of my dress caught the light from the chandeliers, shimmering softly as I moved through the crowd. I walked with my head held high, my posture perfectly straight, projecting an aura of absolute, unshakable confidence. I did not try to blend into the background or hide near the perimeter of the room. I walked directly through the center of the floor, forcing people to step aside and take notice. It only took a few moments for them to spot me. I saw my mother's eyes widen as she caught sight of the midnight blue fabric. She tapped Stephanie frantically on the shoulder, pointing a shaking finger in my direction. Stephanie spun around, her face instantly twisting into a mask of pure, furious indignation. She locked eyes with me from across the room, and I saw her whisper something sharp to Brad. Brad turned, his smile vanishing completely. He slammed his scotch glass down onto a nearby cocktail table with enough force to make the crystal ring loudly over the music. The three of us had not spoken since the explosive confrontation in my office, but the bitter hostility radiating from them was thick enough to choke on. Stephanie grabbed my mother by the arm and began marching directly toward me, pushing aggressively past a group of startled investors. Brad followed closely behind them, his face flushed red with a dangerous mixture of anger and desperate panic. They were moving in for the kill, completely convinced they held all the power in the room. I slowly stopped walking and stood my firm ground near a massive, beautiful floral arrangement right in the exact center of the busy ballroom. I did not shrink away or look around for a convenient exit. I simply waited for them to arrive, offering a calm and perfectly serene smile that I knew without any doubt would absolutely infuriate them to their core. Stephanie reached me first, stopping just inches away, her chest heaving with dramatic, outraged breaths. She looked me up and down, her eyes narrowing with a dark, vicious intent as she eagerly prepared to unleash her highly anticipated public attack against me. The moment of their ultimate reckoning had finally arrived here tonight. Stephanie stopped so close to me that I could smell the sharp chemical scent of cheap perfume she used to mask the lingering scent of her pawnshop desperation. "What do you think you are doing here, Meredith?" she hissed, her voice pitched low to avoid drawing attention. "You have absolutely no right to show your face tonight. Did you really think you could sneak in here and ruin Brad's big night after what you did to us this morning?" I looked at her, keeping my expression completely neutral. "I am not sneaking in anywhere, Stephanie," I replied smoothly. "I am standing in the center of the room." Brad stepped up beside his wife, his face tight with anger. You are an uninvited vendor, Meredith, he growled, pointing a thick finger at my chest. Your company might handle the catering for this event, but you do not belong on the guest list. You are staff. And after the little stunt you pulled, trying to cancel my credit cards, I am having you thrown out right now. Linda chimed in, nodding vigorously. You really are sick, Meredith. You are obsessed with trying to embarrass your sister. Leave right now before you make a complete fool of yourself in front of these important people. Stephanie aggressively waved down two large hotel security guards dressed in dark suits. Excuse me, she called out, her voice loud and demanding. We need some assistance over here immediately. This woman is a vendor who has slipped past the check-in desk. She is actively harassing senior executives and needs to be escorted off the property right this second. The guards exchanged a brief look before making their way through the crowd toward us. Several wealthy guests turned their heads, whispering quietly. Stephanie crossed her arms, offering me a smug, triumphant smirk. You are going to look incredibly pathetic being dragged out of here, she whispered venomously. This is the real world, Meredith. Brad has actual power here. You are nothing. The guard stopped in front of us. Ma'am, is there a problem here? One asked, looking cautiously between Stephanie and me. Yes, there is a massive problem, Stephanie announced loudly, making sure the nearby investors could hear. This woman does not belong here. She snuck in to harass my husband. Remove her immediately. The guard turned to face me, placing a large hand politely but firmly toward my shoulder. Mom, I am going to have to ask you to come with us, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I did not move a single inch. I looked the guard directly in the eyes and offered him a polite, understanding smile. I am not going anywhere, I told him, my voice carrying a quiet, absolute authority. And if you attempt to physically remove me from this ballroom, you will be actively removing the owner of the company hosting this entire event. I suggest you step back and look at the stage. Before the confused guard could process my words, a loud, sharp feedback whine echoed from the main speakers. The jazz orchestra immediately stopped playing mid-note. The heavy murmurs of the wealthy crowd quickly faded into a respectful, expectant silence. Everyone turned their attention toward the brightly lit stage at the front of the room. Richard Harrison, the chief executive officer of Vanguard Logistics, stepped up to the polished wooden podium. He was an older, distinguished man with silver hair and a commanding presence. Brad immediately straightened his posture, puffing out his chest and attempting to look like the loyal, dedicated senior vice president he falsely claimed to be. Stephanie offered me one final hateful glare before turning her attention to the stage, fully expecting Richard to give a standard boring speech. Good evening, everyone, Richard began, his deep voice echoing across the quiet ballroom. Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate the philanthropic efforts of Vanguard Logistics. We have always prided ourselves on our commitment to excellence and navigating the complex challenges of the global market. He paused, taking a slow sip of water. However, as many of our senior investors in the room tonight are aware, the past 2 quarters have presented significant, unprecedented financial hurdles for our firm. We found ourselves facing a severe capital shortage that threatened the very foundation of our operations. The corporate landscape is incredibly unforgiving, and we needed a massive strategic intervention to secure the future of this company and protect the livelihoods of our dedicated employees. I watched Brad face as Richard spoke. The smug arrogance was slowly beginning to crack, replaced by a look of deep professional confusion. Middle management executives like Brad were kept completely in the dark during major structural negotiations. He had absolutely no idea the company was bleeding cash. But I am incredibly proud to announce tonight that Vanguard Logistics has not only survived this financial storm, but we have emerged stronger than ever. Richard continued, a genuine smile breaking across his face. Over the past 72 hours, we have successfully finalized a massive acquisition deal. We have partnered with a visionary investment firm that recognized our potential and provided the critical capital injection required to stabilize our assets. They purchased a complete controlling stake in our corporation. A loud murmur of shock and excitement rippled through the crowd of investors and executives. Stephanie looked at Brad, her brow furrowed in confusion, but Brad was staring blankly at the stage, completely paralyzed by the sudden shift in his corporate reality. This acquisition brings a new era of strict accountability, Absolute transparency and bold leadership to Vanguard Logistics, Richard announced, gripping the edges of the podium. The days of unchecked corporate waste are officially over. The new ownership is already implementing rigorous financial audits to ensure every single dollar of company money is utilized with maximum efficiency and absolute integrity. I saw Brad actually flinch when Richard mentioned rigorous financial audits. The color began to drain from his face as the heavy weight of his massive casino embezzlement suddenly pressed down on his chest. It is my profound honor to introduce the architect of this incredible acquisition, Richard said, raising his hand toward the center of the room. She is a brilliant strategic mind, an absolute force in the corporate world, and as of yesterday morning, the new majority shareholder and the supreme head of our board of directors. Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the center of the room and welcome Ms. Meredith Preston. A bright white spotlight instantly cut through the dim ambient lighting, tracking directly down from the high ceiling and landing perfectly on me. The midnight blue silk of my dress practically glowed under the intense illumination. The entire room erupted into loud, enthusiastic applause. I did not look at the stage. I did not look at the cheering crowd. I looked directly at my family. The physical reaction was absolutely devastating. Stephanie, jaw dropped completely open, her eyes wide with pure, unadulterated horror. Linda gripped the edge of a nearby cocktail table, her knuckles turning completely white, unable to process how the daughter she had mocked for a decade was now receiving a standing ovation from the most powerful people in the city. But Brad was the most satisfying sight of all. He was staring at me utterly terrified, finally realizing that he was completely trapped in his own massive corporate fraud, and his perfect life was officially over forever. I held his terrified gaze for a long moment, letting the absolute reality of his destruction settle deep into his bones. The applause around us finally began to fade as Richard stepped away from the podium and the jazz orchestra started playing again. I did not acknowledge the cheering crowd or the executives rushing forward to eagerly shake my hand. Instead, I looked at the three people who had made my entire life a living hell. I gestured toward the grand staircase leading to the upper mezzanine of the hotel. "Follow me," I said, my voice low and completely devoid of emotion. "We have official corporate business to discuss." I turned and walked away, not waiting to see if they would comply. I knew they would. They had absolutely no other choice in the matter. I climbed the sweeping carpeted stairs, feeling the heavy weight of their desperate footsteps trailing close behind me. At the top of the landing, I led them down a quiet, softly lit corridor toward a private glass-walled VIP room that overlooked the massive ballroom below. I pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped inside. The room was entirely soundproof. Through the thick glass, we could see the hundreds of wealthy guests mingling and celebrating my corporate victory, but inside the room, it was dead silent. I walked over to the long mahogany conference table, situated in the exact center of the room. My secure leather briefcase was sitting exactly where I had instructed my private security team to leave it. Brad stumbled into the room, pulling his silk tie loose as if he were suddenly struggling to breathe properly. Stephanie and Linda followed, looking like cornered animals desperately searching for an exit that simply did not exist. I popped the brass locks on my briefcase. The sharp metallic click echoed loudly in the quiet room. I pulled out the thick, certified forensic accounting dossier Evan had prepared for me and dropped it flat onto the center of the table. The heavy thud made Brad physically flinch backward. "What is that?" Brad asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your life audited," I said. I pushed the certified dossier across the table. 3 years of luxury trips with Vanessa, fake Nevada consulting invoices, nearly $400,000 routed into casino accounts. Richard and the legal team received the same file an hour ago. Stephanie turned slowly toward him, the color draining from her face. "Tell me she is lying," she whispered. Brad said nothing. "You were terminated before the speeches began," I continued. "Vanguard is pressing criminal charges. The federal authorities have already been notified." The remaining fragments of their arrogant facade shattered completely, leaving nothing but raw, pathetic panic. Brad collapsed into one of the leather conference chairs, burying his face in his trembling hands. Stephanie began to hyperventilate, her chest heaving as she backed away from him in pure horror. She bumped into Linda, who was clutching her pawnshop dress, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. The massive mansion, the country club, the designer clothes, it was all gone. There was no trust fund to save them, and now there was no corporate salary either. They were facing absolute total financial and social ruin. Meredith. Please, Linda cried, stepping forward and reaching out with shaking hands. We are so incredibly sorry. We did not know he was doing this. You have to help us. You are our family. You cannot just abandon us to the streets. We will do absolutely anything you want. I will apologize for everything I ever said to you. Stephanie rushed forward, tears streaming down her face, ruining her heavy makeup. She was nodding frantically, agreeing with our completely desperate mother. Yes, please, Meredith, she begged, her voice cracking with pure desperation. I am so sorry about the restaurant. I am sorry about the dress. I will make Caitlin get a job to pay for the car. Just please turn the credit cards back on tonight. We have absolutely nothing left in the world. We will lose the house this week. You have to save us. I looked at the two women who had spent their entire lives treating me like garbage, suddenly begging for the very charity they had relentlessly mocked. Their sudden frantic apologies were entirely meaningless to me, driven only by their sudden, desperate poverty rather than any real, genuine remorse. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for them as they stood there crying. I am not saving anyone, I said, my voice cold and absolute. You made your choices, and now you get to live with the devastating consequences. You are officially and completely cut off. Do not ever call my corporate office or dare to approach my personal home ever again. I turned my back on them and walked out of the glass room, closing the heavy oak door firmly behind me. As I walked down the quiet corridor, I could see them through the soundproof glass, weeping and screaming at each other in the silent ruins of their entirely destroyed lives. Exactly 1 year has passed since I walked away from that soundproof glass room. The swift and brutal reality of the federal justice system did not care about Brad's former executive title or his custom-tailored suits. Following a highly publicized trial that exposed every single detail of his massive embezzlement and his expensive mistress, Brad was found guilty on multiple counts of corporate fraud and grand larceny. He is currently serving a 72-month sentence at a minimum security federal correctional institution in Indiana. The man who once bragged about closing million-dollar deals and eating at exclusive steakhouses now spends his days working in the prison laundry room, earning less than $1 an hour. The ultimate irony is that the massive gambling debts he desperately tried to hide ultimately became the very public evidence that completely destroyed his freedom. With Brad in prison, the heavy financial collapse of my family was absolute and immediate. Stephanie was forcibly evicted from her sprawling North Shore mansion when the bank foreclosed on the property just 2 months after the gala. The luxury estate she used to flaunt to her wealthy neighbors was auctioned off to the highest bidder to help pay back the massive restitution Brad owed to Vanguard Logistics. Stripped of her fraudulent wealth and her arrogant pride, Stephanie was forced to downsize into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a lower-middle-class neighborhood. She now works full-time as a retail associate at a mid-tier department store, folding sweaters and ringing up purchases for the exact same country club women she used to view as her absolute equals. Every time one of her former friends walks past her cash register, pretending not to recognize her, Stephanie is forced to swallow the bitter reality of her new life. Caitlin suffered a remarkably similar fate. The $8,000 invoice for the damaged corporate vehicle went unpaid for exactly 30 days before my accounting department automatically sold it to a commercial collections agency. That massive collection account hit her pristine Social Security number like a freight train, instantly destroying her credit score. When the Ivy League universities ran their final background and financial aid checks, her applications were categorically denied. Without the non-existent family trust fund to pay the exorbitant tuition in cash, Caitlin was forced to abandon her grand collegiate dreams entirely. She is currently working the afternoon shift at a local fast food drive through wearing a polyester uniform that smells permanently like cheap frying oil. She spends her days handing greasy paper bags out of a sliding glass window, desperately trying to scrape together enough minimum wage cash to pay off a debt that will haunt her financial future for the next 7 years. My mother, Linda, experienced the most profound isolation of them all. The moment the local newspapers published the explicit details of Brad corporate embezzlement and the subsequent bankruptcy of the Preston family estate, her entire social circle vanished overnight. The wealthy women at the North Shore Country Club who used to eagerly drink mimosas with her completely blacklisted her from their social calendars. They view financial ruin as a highly contagious disease, and they completely abandoned her. Linda now lives in a tiny subsidized apartment, spending her days sitting alone in front of a small television. She has absolutely no money to maintain her expensive country club memberships, her weekly tennis clinics, or her designer wardrobe. She built her entire identity around the fragile illusion of generational wealth, and without it, she is nothing more than a lonely, bitter woman who drove away the only daughter willing to actually support her. Meanwhile, my life has moved in an entirely different direction. I officially handed the daily operational control of Aura Lifestyle Management over to my trusted executive team, choosing to step back and finally enjoy the massive wealth I spent a decade quietly building. I relocated to the West Coast, purchasing a stunning modern beach house sitting high on the cliffs of Malibu overlooking the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Today, I am hosting a small intimate gathering on my expansive wooden deck as the sun begins to set over the horizon. The salty ocean breeze feels incredibly refreshing against my skin. I am surrounded by the people who form my true chosen family. Vince, my brilliant and deeply loyal wealth manager, is sitting by the outdoor fire pit laughing warmly at a joke my partner just told. My partner is a kind, grounded man who values me for my drive and my intellect rather than the balance of my bank accounts or the designer labels in my closet. My closest friends are gathered around the outdoor kitchen sharing stories and enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. There is no toxic competition here. There is no passive-aggressive criticism or manipulative demands for money. There is only genuine mutual respect and unconditional love. I walk over to the edge of the wooden deck leaning against the smooth glass railing. The sky is currently painted in brilliant shades of vibrant orange, deep purple, and soft pink, reflecting beautifully off the rolling ocean waves below. I hold a delicate crystal glass filled with an incredibly rare, expensive vintage of Cabernet Sauvignon. It is the exact same rich, dark red color as the wine Caitlin threw at me 1 year ago in that upscale Chicago restaurant. I slowly raise the heavy crystal glass to my lips and take a long, deliberate sip. The complex flavors of dark cherry and oak settle warmly on my tongue. I lower the glass and look down at my flawless silk evening gown, now completely untouched by a single drop of liquid. The cool ocean breeze washes over me, carrying away the very last lingering memories of my former toxic life. I take another slow, peaceful sip, enjoying the beautiful sunset, and ensuring that the expensive red wine stays exactly where it always belonged, perfectly contained inside the glass. The hardest lesson I ever had to learn was that blood does not automatically entitle someone to your respect, your peace, or your hard-earned success. For 10 long years, I genuinely believed that if I just gave enough, provided enough, and fixed enough problems, I would eventually earn my family love. I quietly funded their luxurious illusions while they continuously belittled my reality. But I slowly realized that you cannot buy genuine affection from people who are fundamentally committed to misunderstanding you. Toxicity does not magically disappear just because you share a last name or a childhood history. When my niece threw that glass of wine on me, it was not just a ruined dress. It was the exact moment the heavy illusion finally shattered. It taught me that enabling toxic behavior is never an act of love. It is a profound disservice to yourself and to them. When you constantly act as a financial and emotional safety net for people who treat you poorly, you rob them of the opportunity to learn real accountability, and you completely rob yourself of true peace. I learned that true power is not about being loud or causing massive public scenes. True power is having the absolute strength to walk away in complete silence and letting the severe consequences of their own actions do all the talking. You do not owe anyone a seat at your table if they bring nothing but disrespect and pure entitlement. It is perfectly acceptable to dismantle the bridges that only serve to drain your energy so you can finally build a life with people who truly value you. Have you ever had to set firm boundaries or cut ties with toxic family members to protect your own peace? I would love to hear your personal stories and experiences in the comments below. Please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories about resilience, setting boundaries, and finding your true worth. Thank you so much for listening.